Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get going with special counsel. See, because we have quorum, so we're good to go. We have one item to deal with on the agenda before we go in camera, and that's the Canada 150 Community Infrastructure Program. And Deborah. Okay.
Good afternoon, Mayor Brvinovich and Council. I'm here today to provide you highlights of the Canada 150 Community Infrastructure Program. It was announced by the federal government on May the 15th, and being the federal government, we have to have an acronym, and this one is CIP 150, so I'll apologize in advance if at any time I say CPI. So today I'll be speaking about the background of the program, the eligibility of projects that we can apply for, description of projects that staff is recommending for submission, the Centre and the Square's intent to apply, and finally next steps. So the CIP 150 is the federal government's approach to celebrating Canada's 150th anniversary. It's got a Giving Back to Canada theme, and it's a 2-year program, and it's identified $150 million for all of Canada, with $44 million of that money being earmarked for Southern Ontario. The goal of the program is to strengthen public infrastructure and provide economic benefits for Canadian communities, as well as celebrating our shared culture and heritage. The program is available to a number of organizations, including municipalities and not-for-profit organizations, and it's to support projects on a cost-sharing basis. So project eligibility, the categories include, but not limited to, community centres, recreation facilities, culture centres, parks and trails, libraries, and other infrastructure assets owned by the community that benefit the community, such as connectivity and broadband. There are, of course, maximum criteria within the program, and the maximum funding is $1 million or 50%, whichever is lower, but priority may be given to those projects looking to only fund 33% or less. There's no minimum to the number of projects that we can submit, but we have to prioritize by resolution for those submissions. Projects have to be completed by March the 31st, 2018, but priority may be given to projects that will be complete June the 30th, 2017. The projects must be incremental, and what that means is without this funding, would we be doing this at all, or would we have to do it later? And finally, we have to link it to Canada's 150th anniversary. The CAO and the deputy CAOs, they met to identify a short list of projects to be recommended for submission. The following 3 projects are the recommendations, and Ms. Fletcher and Mr. Chapman are here to speak to the specific of those 3 projects. The first one, priority 1, rehabilitate City Hall outdoor spaces. Total cost is expected to be $3 million, and we will be looking to apply for 33%. The public spaces surrounding City Hall are extremely well used for festivals and public events, and they require renovation after 25 years of extensive use. Priority number 2, Kiwanis Park Pool rehabilitation with an expected cost of $3.5 million, and we're looking to apply for the maximum of $1 million. The City of Kitchener has a legislative obligation to make significant changes to the pool filtration by the 2018 operating season. And finally, project number 3, priority number 3, Wi-Fi and public internet access expansion. Total expected cost, about $500,000, and we're looking to apply for 50% or $250,000. The expansion of public Wi-Fi internet at city facilities and public spaces support the objectives of connecting Canadians, and they will be using and the sites anticipated for expansion of public Wi-Fi include Kitchener Memorial Auditorium, the Victoria Park Pavilion, and community arenas and major parks. The Centre and the Square has indicated their intent to apply for funding, and as a not-for-profit organization, they are able to make an independent application for funding. There is no cost to the city for this application. The Centre must receive delegation of authority from the city in order for them to proceed. This requirement is the basis for the second recommendation in the report. The The center did send us a list of projects that they're looking at, and it is a split between exterior of the building and the interior theater, and a total of $2 million that would be completed by 2018. They are planning on reviewing a draft application this Wednesday and be looking to submit by June the 9th. So our next steps are, should council approve the list of projects for submission, staff will look at detailed links to Canada's 150th anniversary and prepare application for submission by June the 9th. And that concludes the highlights of the Canada 150 Community Infrastructure Program.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Deborah. We've got a number of councillors with questions. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, my first question would be, how many proposals can we put in? How many submissions? We currently have 3. Is there any guideline on how many we can submit?
If you can just leave your mic on, Deb.
Okay. There is no minimum. We can submit as many as we want. We just have to prioritize by resolution.
Okay. And how did we go about choosing these 3? It's my understanding there may have been a few more that were submitted from staff. How were these 3 projects chosen?
We reached out to the divisions of the city, to the management, the managers and the directors to see, we told them the criteria and did they have any idea for projects that they would like to be funded, and we brought that list to the CAO and the deputy CAO.
And what criteria was the decision based on?
It was the criteria that's listed in the report, and the criteria is...
No, you don't have to go through the criteria.
Okay.
I read it. Were there other projects that were eligible that were brought forward by staff?
There was a list of approximately 11 projects. Not all of them would have qualified under these criteria.
Okay. It's my understanding, having reached out to staff, that there was a Huron Natural Area project as in a trail upgrade that was put forward by staff that wasn't chosen, that wasn't big dollars, that ideally I would like to see added to the list. And then having reached out to staff a little further, there was a few other projects from the Parks Department that I thought were noteworthy that we could potentially put together and make a larger ask. And I have some of that information in front of me. I don't know if you want this now. It's kind of a question, I guess, to ask staff to go back and look at. But there's a few projects at the Huron Natural Area that could equate to about $500,000. And then there's also some projects at McLennan Park that could equate to about $600,000, of which some of the funding is in place, but the timelines could be put forward. And I believe that they all fit within the criteria. So I would ask staff if we can bundle that package for one ask as a Huron Natural Area McLennan Park project and add that to the list. So basically my ask is, can staff go back and look at that and see if it's feasible to add to the priority list? Understanding you might not have all the details that I have.
Mr. Wilmer?
That I only got this morning.
Certainly we can go back and look at that. Council's final decision will be needed by next Monday because it's your last scheduled meeting before the June 9th application deadline. I would say, though, that our experience in the past with these type of federal programs has been that bundling isn't always very well received, and that if we have smallish items, it runs the risk of us getting only the smallish item rather than a bigger ticket item. So it is a bit of a strategic choice to put on larger items only as our recommendation.
I think it's also, I guess that's more of a comment I can make after. I would like to add to the list the Huron Natural Area Kettle Creek or Kettle Trail upgrade for sure, and that staff go back and look at the bundling of the Huron Natural Area and the McLennan Park upgrades so that we can bundle that and make it. I think there's a case to be had that because there's a lot of like works that could be going into both the Huron Natural Area and McLennan Park with parking lots, so paving, trails, that we may be able to bundle that together in our tender and actually get a favorable pricing. So I think that that's important to look at. So that would be my recommendation in addition to what staff have put forward there.
Okay, so I'll come back to you later. Councillor Ioannidis?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Verbanovic. My question is, the items that are here listed for submission, where do they fall in our capital budget? In the timelines?
Mr. Chapman?
Through you, Your Worship, item number 1 is not in the capital forecast presently. It was identified in the capital budget report as something requiring funding. The second item has $1 million of funding in 2015. The balance is unfunded. And number 3 essentially has no funding in our capital forecast.
Okay. I think they're pretty worthy projects anyways. I mean, if you look at our square there, it's in pretty rough shape. And I think the Wi-Fi is really important as well. But I don't know if Councillor Galloway is going to move the recommendation, but I'll move that.
Well, she indicated she was moving
Okay.
the recommendation.
Okay.
I said I'd come back to her. Councillor Singh?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had some similar questions and a little bit of concern as well. How long have we known that these funds are available to us?
Since last week, roughly, when the province announced it. A week ago Friday, actually.
Okay, that's well, it still speaks to my concern. I think it could have gone through committee to receive recommendations from council as well.
Councillor Singh, there was no opportunity. It was a week ago Friday. This is the first chance to deal with it.
It could have been added on. Could it not? We have committee meetings today.
Right, we're dealing with it today.
And it could be ratified through council in council meeting next week. That was the point I was trying to ask, if that could have worked with the timelines.
Mr. Chapman?
Through you, Mayor Verbanovic, my understanding from the clerk is that there's not a provision to allow emergency items to come onto committee, and so it was brought to council today. As the CEO's indicated, if council wishes to give this more consideration, it can be deferred until next Monday's council meeting if there are additional items to come forward with more detail.
And is that going to put jeopardy to the timeline, or from whatever June 9th is the last date? So
I think what we'd like today is a sense of whether or not, in general, you at least support the 3 that are in front of you. We can start working up the applications. If there are more projects to come forward, we would work on those applications after next Monday.
I'm sorry if I missed this. Did we get any indication of some other priorities that were looked at as well? Or I know this was looked at by the CLT, but did council get any priority list as to the overall scope of things that were looked at as part of what could be applied for funding?
These are the recommendations. Certainly, if you want us to bring back other items, as has been alluded to, we can do that for next Monday.
And so that's what I wanted to confirm. I think that would be more prudent. I think it's if it doesn't put the application into jeopardy and allows us to have a sober thought as to where the priorities need to lie, we can ratify this in next week council meeting, and allows us to see exactly what that engagement and discussion took place, part of decision making to get to this 3 items. And of course, at the same time, I agree with some of the comments made by Councillor Galloway-Seelock that if there are ability to apply for or put forward additional suggestions that could have a wider benefit to the community, similar to some of the ideas that she put forward, that would be advisable as well. One thing that I want to ask is, I know this is short timeline, but one of the things that we've struggled with is through our master plan for our trails network. And really, the essence of this type of program, I think, looks to maximum benefit to the entire community. Am I correct in that assertion?
Go ahead.
It's meant to encourage the benefit of communities within Ontario.
Right. So I'll give my comments quickly, and I think this needs to be deferred to next week council for approval, taking into Councillor Galloway-Seelock's suggestions, and at the same time, council having an opportunity to see the full list. But I think we also need to give consideration to our trails. That is significant work that's underfunded. At the same time, us be able to meet that obligation, we need to prioritize through our tax base as well. If we can achieve this assistance, especially because it's more of a one-time cost with capital, then we need to be able to leverage it. I don't disagree that our city hall does need some, doesn't need a facelift for Civic Square at least, or Carl's Air Square. But at this point, I'm not sure we have a full understanding what's entirely planned out for the works and scope for the square, and that's one area that may or could be replaced with something else that could have a more wider community benefit as well. So my recommendation is for this to be deferred to next week, Monday, and waiting to see what that list would be, and having an opportunity for council to send further suggestions and a wider conversation during council for us to be able to give our recommendations as well.
Okay, Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. What does this work, this new work, especially the two that are not in our capital budget, mean in terms of staff resource time?
Ms. Fagerdahl?
Well, it is my understanding, and I can let Mr. Chapman and Ms. Fletcher speak to the specific, is that some of the pre-work would be done by staff, but it's the plan that they would be done by a contractor.
Okay, but would we be needing to engage a consultant for any of these projects at all?
I will defer to Ms. Fletcher to talk about the specifics.
Ms. Fletcher?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I look at the City Hall Outdoor Spaces project, that is something that's in the Facilities Management Business Plan. We were to do a master plan for the outdoor spaces, so the Duke Street elevation and the main square, bring back a master plan, so public engagement and master plan presented to council for consideration and approval next June. What we're suggesting right now is, at the very least, we know we need to replace the concrete on the Duke Street elevation and in the main square. If we were to replace the concrete, we see an opportunity to look at reducing salt usage by putting in some sort of snow melting heat source. And we might look at some stormwater management demonstration projects. So that's what we're really putting forward in terms of the application related to City Hall outdoor spaces. In terms of the master plan coming forward next June, that would result in a series of phased projects that we would bring forward as part of the regular budget process.
Okay, thanks for detailing what your hope is and what your plan is, but you still didn't tell me how much more staff. Does this require more staff time, or does this require a consultant to come in and take a look at the work?
We really don't look at adjusting our work plan, except we would accelerate the portion related to the concrete replacement in the square.
So that's the only project that would be funded out of this submission, is the concrete?
The concrete, a snow melting source, and stormwater management. If we had enough money to look at some additional infrastructure upgrades, we might do that, but we want to be very specific for the federal funding application.
Mr. Wilmer wanted to add something.
Just a general observation as well, that it's our understanding that staff time is not an eligible cost in this program, so we would certainly be trying to minimize the amount of staff time that's spent on the projects.
Okay, but if this the Carl's Air Square and the RepNet, were not in the budget, so staff time was not planned to be dedicated to that for 2015. We would be advancing these projects out of the capital budget and looking for additional funding, which we don't have in the capital budget as now.
So through the mayor, this is in the business plan for 2015 to conduct the master plan. So Cynthia and her team will be doing that work in 2015-16. It's just that until the master plan is completed, we didn't put it into the budget, but we would have expected that this would come into the budget at some point fairly soon. As Deborah had indicated earlier, for projects to be eligible, they need to be projects that we're not already committed to funding in the current year.
Okay, but the Kiwanis Park has some committed funding to it already, does it not?
It does have some funding attached to it. As part of the 2015 capital budget review, Mr. Hildebrand brought forward a report to Council to alert Council that we do have a legislated requirement to
Oops, sorry, go ahead.
Am I cut off?
No, keep going.
To put in a more robust circulation and filtration system. We knew that it was going to be a costly venture, and it had to be in place for the 2018 swimming season. What we recommended to Council is that we earmark $1 million. Our intention had been to come forward in September with a more complete report as part of the 2016 capital budget process.
Okay, all right. What projects would be deferred or delayed through this? Because, I mean, there are projects that staff are working on now and would be working on for the next couple of years. What projects are sort of off the table now because of these are being, especially the two that were not planned for 2015 and 16? What projects have been deferred?
To be perfectly honest, we will have to go back and look at our work plan for the next year or year and a half. As Mr. Wilmer has indicated, it was on our plan to do the master plan for the City Hall Square. It was not on our plan to accelerate the concrete replacement. So, as has been indicated, we found out a week ago Friday that we had this opportunity to make applications, so we will be reviewing our work plan moving forward.
And I think that's what's important is to understand.
Through the Mayor, just to supplement that, if I may, through the Mayor.
Go ahead.
The way we're looking at this whole program is this is an opportunity to leverage federal funding. These are projects that we do expect we would be doing in the short to medium term in any case. And so, in fact, they're freeing up funding for other projects. This is really a gift opportunity from the federal government. So, yes, there will be additional workload demands on our staff, but that's a pretty small component of the work. And it's actually a really good investment of our own time in order to leverage this federal opportunity.
I'm not saying it's not a good use of our time. What I'm saying is that there are projects, and Councillor Galloway-Seelock identified a couple, but there's, I mean, in speaking to Mr. Ritz, the Upper Canada Park, which it was something that was brought through budget. There was one that was identified as a project, and it has significant dollars attached to it, which, if we were to use the funding from the federal government, would free up funding for the Grand River Riverside Park, which is what one of Mayor Verbanovic's wishes at budget time. So I think we have to understand a full picture of what and the rationale for the prioritization of especially two projects that were not in the capital budget at the time. One other question.
Your time's up.
Oh, then I'll come back.
Come back to you. But just for clarity, both the Upper Canada project and the Grand River Park were sent back in the budget process to come back with a report, both in terms of what would need to be done and funding sources for that. That was the direction that happened out of budget, just so that we have some clarity on that. Councillor Galloway-Seelock, more questions? No. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Just one question of staff with respect to potentially adding items. I see in the financial implications that the city's matching funds could range from $250 to $2 million, which is a pretty broad range. Could that be narrowed at all from historically speaking? Do we have any idea where that, like, is the median in the middle of that? I guess my question is, since we already have items that total $2.25 million in, and we only see a maximum of $2 million, if we're adding more items, are we basically just giving the federal government more options to choose from, but not necessarily all of them getting funded?
Mr. Chapman?
Through you, Mayor Verbanovic, that's a certainty. There's only $44 million for all of southwestern Ontario, not including just municipalities, but the not-for-profit sector. And so our allocation on a per capita basis would be quite small relative to what we're seeking here. And I would remind you that in the past, when we've submitted large lists, it's not been unheard of that projects low on our priority list were the ones selected by the federal government.
Okay. So, and again, that $2 million, sorry, I said 2.25, but that doesn't include, so the upset limit of $2 million would also include whatever the Center in the Square applies for.
No, that's only with reference to our 3 projects.
No, but okay, sorry, the $2 million in financial implications, so it's possible that the Center in the Square could be in addition to that $2 million in the financial implications?
The reference in financial implications is to what our costs would be. So if your question is yes, would their contribution to their own projects be in addition to that? The answer is yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Deborah, there were, did I hear you correctly, there were 11 suggested projects?
Go ahead.
There was more than the 3. So my recollection is there was around 11 or 12.
And how many qualified?
There was probably 2 that, without going into a lot of detail, would definitely be clear that they wouldn't qualify. The other ones may or may not, depending on how detailed we went into the criteria.
And will council see a list of those 11 projects?
If council chooses to have the full list, we can supply that.
I'd like to see the full list. And why don't we have those 11 projects before us now as a list?
I will ask Mr. Chapman to speak to that.
Mr. Chapman?
Through the mayor, as the mayor indicated, timelines are extremely tight on this project, and so we simply polled staff that were available on the day we put the request out and discussed it later that afternoon. So a lot of the discussion was based on the knowledge of the CAO and the department heads. It was not an exhaustive review across the organization. So we're certainly happy to provide the whole list. I would just qualify it in saying it doesn't represent the full landscape of opportunities across the organization, simply the response from those that were available on the day the request went out.
Thank you.
Councillor Fernandez, do you have more questions?
Yes, I did.
So you hold on. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Fernandez.
Okay. Just going back in 2010, there was another infrastructure funding project that through the federal government, and at that time we moved forward McLennan Park and a couple of other projects. And I remember asking what we ended up paying out in consulting fees, and it was over $5 million. And that's what I'm going to with this. I just don't want to see any of that money go out of this city in terms of the corporation and the opportunity to use every dollar for a project that will have greater implications. So that's one of the reasons why I would definitely support the Kiwanis Park, because we've already talked about that, we've identified that, but the other 2 projects are really a little bit too far out. My other, I think that was, I guess I just need a further understanding by Monday, if possible, what projects, I guess if we're going back to the business plan, what other projects may be deferred or bumped because of this. My understanding is the business plan is tied to our budget, so we're challenged not to deviate from the business plan, and now we're being asked to deviate from the business plan. So a better understanding would be helpful.
Okay, just before I continue, I think I need to make one thing clear here. Staff are trying to take advantage of an opportunity where another order of government has put dollars on a table with, quite frankly, what are, I consider, not very reasonable timelines, okay? To basically in 3 weeks expect any municipality, organization, or whatever to get their applications in and to have dollars and to have a chance at accessing some of those dollars. Some have suggested that this program may have some links to events that are happening later this year in the federal scene. That's not for me to judge whether that is or is not the case. However, I think staff are trying to, in as reasonable of a way as possible, respond to those timelines, and it's something that all municipalities are dealing with and aren't happy about. But obviously, at the same time, you know what? You want to maximize the chance of getting any dollars we can for the municipality, because any dollars we get for these projects or any other projects on the list will ultimately free up dollars for other projects that are on our list and perhaps don't have the funding right now. And I think, you know, while I understand some people's frustration, I think people also need to remember there has not been time to go and look at this in depth. There has not been in time to do a 6-month analysis of this. We're trying to, staff are trying, and respectfully, council's trying to respond in a way so that we at least get a chance at some of these dollars. And I'd ask that people consider that when they're looking at all this. Councillor Galloway-Seelock, you have another question.
And that's fair, and I did the exact same thing when the stimulus fund came forward. Staff came forward with a list. We were on tight timelines, and McLennan Park wasn't on the list at the time, and it was a project I brought forward which happened to get stimulus funding. And I just, before I ask my question, I wouldn't agree with the comment that we've had things low on our priority list chosen, because the stimulus fund was one of them. And while it may not have been top on the list, it was definitely a benefit to the community of years in advance getting that park open. So I think that that's a subjective comment. But my question would be, we talked about, so basically we would be committing, if these projects were chosen that don't have capital funding, we would be committed to funding those then come our 2016 budget, the number 1 and 3. That's correct. Are projects eligible that have some funding in place but not the full funding?
Mr. Chapman.
So if there's $200,000, I'll just say, in the budget already, but you need another $150,000 to complete that project, are those eligible?
Through you, Mayor Verbanovic, I would say a qualified yes. If you look on page 2 at the wording of the incrementality criteria, it says it will need to attest that it would not be, that it's incremental and would not have otherwise been constructed or constructed as quickly were it not for funding from the CIP. So in the case of Kiwanis Park, we're saying that it would not be constructed as quickly. We can't do the work in 2015 with the funds we have today. It's an open question whether or not we'd have the funds in 2016. If they approve it, we can move ahead. It will be done more quickly.
I just wanted to be clear because I believe that would be the case for the 2 that I'm recommending that we look at and see if we can bring forward. Is it time for that, or are we still on questions?
No, still have 2 more people with questions. Your comment, Councillor Singh, your comment or question? Okay, question, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I asked this earlier about a delay and how it could jeopardize the program. So from what I heard from staff was that you would prefer us to give some sort of direction if out of the 3 here, there was more of a common agreement so that work on that application would start immediate, as opposed to having to wait all together until next week. Is that correct?
Mr. Chapman?
Yes, we'll start working on these 3 applications, and so if council categorically rejects them, tell us now and we'll remove it. Otherwise, we'll start to prepare the applications.
Okay, all right. Can I make comments related to that or come back afterwards?
Why don't we get a motion on the floor first, and then I'll come back to you for comments.
Okay, right.
Councillor Galloway-Seelock?
Yeah, so my motion would just be to include the Huron Natural Area Kettle Trail upgrade, and that can be put in or combined with the Huron Natural Area as well as the McLennan Park upgrades, which would total $1.1 million as a project as a whole. And ask staff to look at that and address it and bring it back on Monday to see if that would be feasible. If I can just quickly comment.
Yep, please do.
It probably won't be quick. I shouldn't say it'll be quick. I come back to this a lot, and the Huron Natural Area has had a master plan since 2001, and we cannot get things done because we don't have money in the budget. We have a small incremental amount every year that allows us to save and kind of put in a trail here and there. But we've got a serious master plan that we've paid a lot of money for that sits on a shelf and doesn't get any funding. We need to continue to work on that. My understanding is there's a little bit of money, $225,000 for this trail upgrade, but we need another $150,000 in order to make the project viable. And we don't have that money to do that work. So I'd like to see that move forward. My rationale for combining the Huron Natural Area improvements as well as the McLennan Park is because there's a lot of pieces that need to happen at both of those, and I think if we bring them together, we may be able to see some cost savings and get those projects done. There's trails that need to be done, there's paving that needs to be done, so those things I think would help us get a favorable tender out there. And McLennan Park has had a master plan for, I'm going to say, since about 2005 or 6. And yes, it got moved forward, which is great news, but now it needs to be completed so that we can take that master plan and say we've completed that, and it will need the upgrades, obviously, as you continue to move forward. If we choose those projects, we don't have to find all that money in the capital forecast that number 1 in the City Hall and the Wi-Fi public access has, because we already have incremental funds. We just don't have the full amount that we need to complete these projects. So I'd really like staff to look at those. I think they'd be really well received by our community if we could continue to make steps in improving both of those parks. And we've committed to making our major parks a great place to go, and I think we need to continue to do that. Having some of the other information around Upper Canada Park, I'll just quickly comment on that. I think we need to really do that master plan before we can try and apply for grant funding from that, and I see that moving forward in its due time. But I really think we need to seriously consider these ones that we've had on our shelves for a long time and use this opportunity to leverage those funds with this grant opportunity. So I ask members of council to allow this to continue to move forward. I'm not going to suggest any priority ranking on it now. I'll probably, if it becomes a viable project that staff can bring forward on Monday, I'll look to make some comments about that at that point, but I'd just like staff to look at it at this point in time.
Okay. So to be clear, your motion is that staff continue working on these, look at Huron Natural Area, bring it all back, and with a priority if that's part of it, correct?
I want the Huron Natural Area, the Kettle Trail project, which was one of the projects that was submitted by staff, that to be included as number 4, and then number 5 would be the Huron Natural Area and McLennan Park bundled. Understanding that if the bundling moves forward, that the Kettle Trail project would be included in that.
Okay.
I hope that's clear.
Mr. Chapman, does that give you the clarity you need?
Thanks.
Yep. Okay. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Just trying to anticipate where this is going. Part of my concern is the concern I've had in the past whenever there's a lump sum of funding. LEAF comes to mind, the LEAF funding and how that was dealt with. First of all, I think this entire thing's despite the short timeline, it's very positive because no matter what, it's going to help us be more progressive and build some things in our community that we need ahead of time. So I think this is nothing but positive, and I understand that there's been a very, very tight timeline. And in that case, staff has independently, and by that I mean not politically, come forward with some items that I'm in favor of, but also really the key here, as I see it, is offsetting costs that we would most likely have to incur at some point in the future anyway, even though they're technically new items or not going to be funded in the near future. So I'm hesitant. Well, I won't be able to support an addition of anything else, at least without seeing some background information. And I'm also hesitant too because I think what we're doing here, we add more on this list, is we're increasing the likelihood that one of the top 3 aren't going to be funded, because it appears that the federal government tends to pick and choose and doesn't give a whole lot of consideration to our priority. So my fear right now is that I think I'm going to see a question coming down that people want to see all 11 items or 9 items, whatever it was, and then we're going to have a mess on council because everyone's going to throw in their own personal preference, ward protection. I get that. I mean, that's part of our jobs, but I would really like to see some respect for the idea that this came very, very quickly, and staff tried to depoliticize it by bringing forward these 3 items. So I would, in closing, I just want to say I would definitely support at this point that we acknowledge that, and this isn't even my preferred order. Honestly, I would like to see the order different in terms of priority, but I would like to see council approve 1, 2, and 3 as priority, and I would be willing to consider a deferral of any other items to be potentially added at council.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd like to quickly make a comment on initially what I had said and clarify. It's no way of being critical of staff. It's more of the process. I understand the short timelines, but again, it's always prudent to ensure that the representatives of this community have an opportunity to engage in discussion and give their suggestions as well. Comments earlier have said, and I recognize this, that staff are cognizant of and try to effectively and efficiently to meet the tight timelines, try to depoliticize the process. But at the same time, I think it needs to be understood that as representatives of this community, we have a very strong and in-depth understanding of what the needs and asks of this community are. Outside of what's laid out through our strategic plan, through our business plan, which sometimes is more of a black and white approach. So having opportunities like this that aren't always available to us, of having accelerated funding or additional funding to leverage to do improvements or benefit our community, it helps to have that buy-in and ask of council, and that's why I had wanted to ensure that we had an understanding of what those other items were discussed, what they were on the list, so we could give some input. What's on here, it's not necessarily bad. I would have picked some of these on my own anyways. Kiwanis Park pool rehabilitation, if that's something that's necessary and required to be done, if you can leverage that and have it, part funded from the feds, why not? As well as the Wi-Fi for public internet access, that's something that we've been working towards, and additional funds need to be committed regardless. And I think that's an awesome opportunity for us to be able to take this on. Where kind of paused a little bit was with the City Hall outdoor space rehabilitation, because what I saw were addition to items perhaps we would have had paused a bit and asked, do we really need to include this right now? Do we need to add this extra cost of heating, of the stormwater? Not to say that's a bad thing. Those are would be awesome additions to the improvements to the City Hall outdoor space, but we also have to be cognizant of overall balance and requirements throughout the whole city as well. And perhaps I'm not supportive of that funding that would be required to even meet our portion if the feds were to approve that portion of the request. So I don't know if this is possible or not. I want to be able to give direction to staff so they can move forward with some part of this work for the application process. I'm supportive of Kiwanis and the Wi-Fi public access, but I'm not so sure about number one yet, because I haven't seen what some of those other items were on the list. I would like to be able to give direction to staff that they have my support on the 2 and 3, but for number one to be balanced with what else was on the list, as well as what's been put forward by Councillor Galloway Sealock on next week, Monday. Is that type of deferral even possible?
Well, to be clear, there's a motion on the floor already, and that motion includes those three and asking for those 2 additional items to be looked at and considered.
That would mean that just there'll be more applications for forward, not a priority of just 3. And I'm also, I think, in agreement with Councillor Davey that if we put too many suggestions on the table as well, we don't know which ones the feds will take, and we may lose out on an opportunity that may be more of a priority.
And council will have the opportunity then next week to deal with that once we have that additional information. The additional items that are being proposed or that the full list that's being asked for right now is not contemplated. I don't believe that we are going to be inserting those potentially into the list, but that council has those as information. I guess my caution and concern would be that it takes time to develop these applications.
I get that.
And so if we approve it next Monday, it's going to take time to get those applications together. So I think if these are the ones that we want to potentially see move forward, whether we move forward with all 5 or just 3 of them, or we change the priority, I think that can wait till next week. I don't think we can have a whole other 2 or 3 or 4 work their way into the list next week and expect that we're going to get our application in on time. And at some point, folks, we also need to remember that we've got staff that we also rely on to give us their best advice based on the criteria, past experience with federal government funded programs, and the kinds of things we may or may not get money for, and the kinds of things that play out in terms of federal government decisions around some of this stuff.
And I'm reflective of that. So part of this, what we're approving, am I able to commit to, say, 2 and 3, so staff or other council members can do the same, so they have more guidance as to these are items definitely that are going to be a part of the application process, so they can start working on those applications sooner than later.
What I'm saying is the motion right now is these 3, along with 2 additional ones that information is coming back from, is work that staff will be doing, and the final decision will be made next week.
Yeah, and that's... again, I understand
the timing. I'm not sure how that's different than what you're looking for, because you're saying that you don't have the information until next week on number 1. What I'm saying is the final decision on number 1 won't be made until next week.
And maybe I'm not explaining myself. I think it'd be prudent on us to give more clear direction on some of these items that we are absolutely sure of, so there's no changing come Monday if there's other items that are looked at. So we don't have 5, 6 items for application. We could try to streamline and keep it to a minimum 3 or 4 if there's another one being added on. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so
I'll say it through my comments, and I would recommend others to do the same. I'm saying I will look to see with additional information that will come back on Monday, but I am very favorable of 2 and 3 of what's on the list and the report.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. I guess I'm sort of taking a little bit of exception, I guess, to the fact that we're asking questions about this process, and given the fact that there are tight timelines, that's happened in the 4.5 years I've been a councillor. That's happened a number of times, but it is our job as elected representatives to ask the questions, because we're elected representatives. And looking at the first thing I saw when I saw that City Hall outdoor product space rehabilitation, the first thing I thought about was downtown again. And I think that's what the public is going to say, downtown again. So, I look forward to seeing what the other projects were and maybe have some sense of where the priorities were. We're looking at providing $2 million for that project that we hadn't even considered. All we talked about was doing a master plan for that. So by looking at what Councillor Galloway-Seelock has brought forward, those are projects that already are ongoing and have had limited funding. So let's make a big deal about those and complete those for a community that we identified both in Environics and in November when we sat around talking about what our priorities were parks and trails and outdoor spaces that are connected with that. Number 1 is a downtown spot. Again, number 1. So in light of what Councillor Singh has suggested, I would be happy to support number 2. I'm hesitant on number 3 because I think I want to see what other projects were put forward, and I think that Councillor Galloway's projects could easily fall into one of these categories if we're going to put forward 3 priorities in hopes that the federal government will pick up on one of those. The other quick comment I wanted to make was around the Upper Canada Park. I realize that it may be a little bit premature because we haven't done a master plan, but if there was a way that we could move that forward and put that on the list, if it was already added as a list item from our staff, I'd like to see us do something there as well. That has had minimal attention for over 10 years. So those are my comments. Councillor
Ioannidis.
Thank you, Mayor Urbanovic. I guess the concern I'm having here is we're looking. This is like a gift, and now everyone wants to get a piece of the gift and get more out of the gift. And my concern is, I think if we start adding all kinds of different additional items, we're actually not going to achieve what we really want to do, is get an actual impact on the community and get the maximum amount of dollars that we need for the community. And I'm not prepared to support Councillor Galloway Seelock's motion. I prefer to stick with the 1, 2, 3. I think it's independent of what our wishes are, and as a whole, I think staff have looked at this probably holistically, and would look at this better than what we would look at it, because I can see where this is going to go next week, where everyone's going to pick their ward-specific project and want to push that, and I don't want to see that. I want to see what's best for the community first as a whole. So that's why I want to stick with 1, 2, 3.
Councillor Etherington?
Yeah, quickly through you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't intend to be critical of staff earlier on. I'm just elected to be here, and I need information to make an intelligent decision. So I want, again, to make certain that I'm going to get that information on for Monday's meeting. And I have no problem with any of these 3 suggested items, but I do want that additional information. I can't make an intelligent decision without knowledge of what went into making the choices before us. So, are we going to get a full list for Monday?
Staff have said they will provide you with that list for Monday.
Terrific.
Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Just quickly.
Actually, hold on. Councillor Marsh.
Yep.
I'll come to you last before I make my comments. Councillor Marsh.
Just a quick comment. I want to say thank you to the staff for bringing this forward and for the work in prioritizing these 3 things. I think that we'll have a more fulsome discussion next week. But I just want to just add that I think that any opportunity we have to leverage dollars from other levels of government to improve our city is welcome. And so I'd hate for, when it becomes more and more complex, for it to be a deterrent from doing this every opportunity we have. So thanks.
Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, I hope I didn't come across as any disrespect to staff, because I simply just wanted to bring forward an idea that I've been trying to get funding for years, and I hope that they can appreciate that. I understand the process. I understand how these work. But I'm concerned that we're sitting around the Horseshoe today making assumptions on what may be added to the list next week. I know we have a history of maybe not doing things always according to plan, but right now I understand that there's only 2, really only potentially 1 being added to the list. It's just I've broken them out into 2. And moving forward with 4 isn't really, I don't think that big of a deal. I see them all as being a priority for our community, and they do all benefit the community as a whole. I dare you to go to McLennan Park and see how busy that is in the summer months. I dare you to go to the Huron Natural Area and see the people who are coming from across the city and across the region to enjoy that space. But let's complete them. They've been on our books for way too long, and we need to do something to support them. This isn't about being ward specific, because quite frankly, McLennan Park is no longer in the ward that I represent. But it's about getting these projects completed, and I think that that's really where our focus needs to be, or at least putting that option out so that the federal government can make those decisions. So these do benefit the community as a whole, just as some of these other projects would as well. So I'm not going to sit here today and say I pick one. I intentionally came here today to add to the list, not take away from the list, because I feel that the projects that are there are important and a priority. And anytime these types of funding come forward, anything that I approve, I see as a priority. And so if the federal government chooses any one of them, I'm happy. If they choose more than one of them, I'm even more happy. So I see anything we bring forward as a priority moving forward for our community.
Councillor Davey.
I already commented. I'm actually going to comment. Just wanted some questions of clarity. First of all, so we are in special counsel, so we have to be careful that the recommendation's in principle so we can reconsider it Monday. But I had a question of clarification on the motion then. So the motion is to approve the 3 items plus, I guess, an item 4 and a 5 now. It's not to receive information? No, it's not an amendment. It was moved all as one, right?
Yes.
So is it to move those items 4 and 5 at this point?
No. So to be clear,
yeah.
And I've taken some latitude so we can move things along and not ask for a written motion here. But what's being asked right now is that these 3 items that are listed here, plus the additional 1A or 4A and 4B, I'll call, that Councillor Galloway Seelock referenced, are the ones that we're approving in principle. that staff bring back the additional information that's been requested, including a potential reprioritization, and that information come back in a report for next Monday, along with the full list of projects that were considered.
Okay, and I don't mean to be a stickler, and I know you're trying to push it forward, but my problem is approving it at this point without having the information. So I would move deferral of item 4A and 4B, we'll call, and still have that information back. I know it might be semantics to some, but I can't approve it because I don't understand it at this point. So I just I'd move deferral of item number 4. It's not really, it'll effectively be the same thing, except I'm just not voting in favor of it yet.
Okay, I will deal with that separately then. Okay, so I'm just going to speak to this. I too want to thank staff for the work that they've done on this in a very timely manner. I know there's frustration that people have around the timelines around this thing, but unfortunately, and yes, it has happened on a number of occasions, but these are provincial and federal programs that we don't set, and staff work to fit them into already busy schedules and get these reports out to us as quickly as they can, and to consider with their best professional advice what makes sense for our community. I do have a shared concern that we don't start becoming parochial in terms of these. This isn't, and I get concerned when things start getting pitched as downtown versus suburbia. This city hall does not belong to the downtown. This city hall is the seat of government that it belongs to the entire community. And so that tens of thousands of citizens from every single corner of the city come to. So I think we just need to be careful in terms of how we position some of these things. I will support both motions today. I think these three make sense for a wide variety of reasons, both in terms of their importance to the community, the likelihood of potentially them standing a chance of being approved, the fact that they are from at least 2 different ridings as I see it right now. I also see the rationale in looking at the additional area that Councillor Galloway-Seelock has raised, and we'll have an opportunity to make a final decision on that next week. So, with that, I will deal with the 2 parts then. All those in favor of the first part, which is City Hall, Kiwanis, and Wi-Fi? Sure. Recorded vote has been called. Yeah. We need a seconder, seconded by Councillor Davey. All those in, we can turn on the voting. 1, 2, 3 in the clause about Center in the Square. That's carried unanimously, and now we'll deal with the additional. Yeah. Yep. So the 2 additional ones are being deferred till next Monday for consideration then. Yep. Councillor Davey is saying that he's moving deferral till next Monday because he doesn't feel he can even vote in principle until he has additional information about is it eligible and all that stuff. Yes, it's recorded. Yeah. Well, staff will still do the information, bring the report and everything. So let's be, it's a semantic that I'm not exactly clear on, but let's trying to move this along. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried as well.